Okay, hi guys. Welcome to another week of yoga. Um, I wanted to this week start talking about a little bit of anatomy stuff because we've started talking about the ethical practice of yoga, which are the yamas and the niyamas that you're doing these weekly reflections on. This week we're doing truthfulness. But the third limb of yoga, which is the one that we are doing most commonly, which is the actual like physical yoga practice, um, is sort of the next thing that is on the list. But it's important to talk about some anatomy and kind of how your body works um, as we're moving through these poses so that we can just kind of make sure that you're moving through them in a way that like feels right to your body in a way that you understand in your body and that is sort of aligned in a way that feels good. So first of all, I wanted to start by showing this picture from a book about yoga anatomy that I really like. But it's showing these two different people who are practicing yoga. And it just shows that your anatomy, like literally the way your bones fit into your other bones, determines sort of how these poses look on your body. So in this picture, this person and this person are both doing the same exact pose, but because of the way that their leg bone fits into their hip bone at a different angle, it determines whether they can come forward or not. So the person on the left just has it's not that she's not flexible, it's that her bones attaching together literally like prevent her from going any further in her hip joint. And for the person on the right, they don't have that same issue, probably because their hip joint is actually like a little bit shallower. And so the leg bone, which is kind of like this, and the hip socket, which is kind of like this, the leg bone is able to move further in the person on the right than the leg bone of the person on the left. And this is true for us too, right? Like we don't all have the same hips and the same legs. And so just because someone in class is able to fold really far, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily more flexible than you. It just might mean that their bones are built in a different way. So kind of keep that in mind as we're doing classes together. That just because we're doing them together doesn't mean that they should ever look the same necessarily. Okay, so along with that, I wanted to kind of talk about a few different anatomy words that I've been using, but just kind of want to make sure that we kind of talk about what they mean. So the first ones are flexion and extension. Flexion is moving a limb forward. So limb moves forward. And extension is a limb moving backward. So I'll show you an example where this is pretty obvious and one where it's a little trickier. So here is a person doing two poses. Don't worry about the long Sanskrit names. Um, this one, where her leg is coming forward, is flexion. And when she's in dancer pose, her leg is moving backwards, her hip and her leg are in extension. So forward, flex, and then backwards is extending. Now, a time when this is a little bit harder to figure out is in your spine, which is not really a limb, but it is something that can flex and extend. So when she's coming forward, this is a forward fold, and this is flexing. So just remember forward fold, flex. And then when she's doing this back bend in cobra, or really sphinx, but a back bend of any kind is extension of the spine. Okay, so forward fold, flex, and back bend is extension. And when we do yoga, it's important that we have a little bit of both because they complement each other. So when we move through sun A's, we're doing these forward folds, which are flexing the spine. But we're also doing cobra, which is extending the spine. So we're getting stronger sort of in both directions. All right, so that is flexion and extension. Two more that are opposites of each other are abduction and adduction. So abduction is limbs move away from midline of body. And then adduction, think about like adding together. So I'll just say that here. Adduction is when the limbs move towards the midline of the body, but that means that they're moving towards one another. So right now, my hands that are coming together, it's hard to get in the screen. Hands coming together is adducting. And if they're moving apart, they're abducting. So limbs move toward midline of body. And that's abduction and adduction. A lot of times we think about this in the hips. So abduction is sort of like any time that you're opening in the legs, like a butterfly stretch would be abduction. Adduction is anytime the inner thighs would be squeezing together. So maybe like a chair pose would be adduction. Okay. Last two that are sort of like this opposite thing is protraction and retraction. Shoulders. Protraction is moving the shoulder blades which are called the scapula, apart. So what happens then is you sort of puff up through the middle of your back. And the example of this is cat pose. So when I tell you like tuck your chin, round your spine, that's your shoulders are protracting, they're spreading apart. And that's what that is. Retraction is the opposite. So this is squeezing the shoulder blades together. Shoulder blades together. So this is the opposite of cat, which of course would be cow. So in cow, we squeeze the shoulder blades together, the chest like dips towards the earth, and your chin lifts, and that's the retraction of the shoulders. Okay, just a couple other things that I want to talk about here is rotation. So if we look at this, your joints can fold, flex, abduct, adduct, and also move laterally, but they also can rotate, which means like twist. So your shoulders and your hips both have the ability to rotate internally and externally. So internal is rotation toward the middle of the body. And external rotation is going to be rotation outward. Oops. Or away from the middle of the body. So in the shoulders and the arms, you are externally rotating every time you lift your arms over your head in the shoulders. So as you lift your arms, you can try it, you notice that your pinkies will start to turn inwards and your thumbs will start to turn outwards. And that is your shoulders externally rotating. You can kind of like play with flipping your hands like this. If your pinkies are in and your thumbs are out, you're externally rotating and you're going to get a bigger space between your shoulders. If your thumbs are in and your pinkies are out, then you're going to be more internally rotating. So we will write that down. So in the shoulders and arms, external is lifting arms above head or pinkies in. And internal is going to be arms behind you or pinkies out. We'll play with this week in our flow. I'll show you some internal and external rotations. In the hips and the legs, you are externally rotating anytime we're in anything that's like warrior two. So warrior two is the one where you are facing sort of the long edge of your mat. Your arms are bending, reaching in opposite directions, and you're sort of like looking over your front fingers and your front knee is bent. Your hips are externally rotating in that situation. So they're pointed outward, sort of like this girl in the diagram. So warrior two-ish things are external. And like square hips, which are things like crescent lunge and warrior one, are going to be internal. And then here's an example of this person doing yoga and kind of showing both. That in the first one, she is externally rotating in both the hips and the shoulders. They're moving away from the midline of her body. And in the second one, which is called eagle, so this one here is goddess. This one is eagle. In eagle, she's internally rotating in the hips because her hips are like, her legs are squeezing together and pointed forward as opposed to pointing like open. And then externally rotating in the arms as well. Okay, so now just one more anatomy term that I want to make sure I give you, two more, is supine and prone. Supine means on back. Prone means on belly. So a pose like happy baby is supine. A pose like cobra is prone. All right, so now just like a little opportunity to quiz yourself. If you look at this girl in this pose, which is called cow face pose, see if you can figure out each rotation, either internal or external, of A, B, and C. So pause and answer now. Okay, so you should have for A that her legs are internally rotating. Because her hips aren't opening, they're closing off and they're square towards the front of what would be her mat. Her arm in B is externally rotating because it's over her head and extending. Her arm in C is internally rotating. I'll just say because it's coming behind her and her shoulder would be moving in towards her body in this pose. So this pose is really interesting because it involves both internal and external rotation of the shoulders and the hips. And some people have more issues with internal rotation versus external. And that by that, I mean one feels more comfortable to them than the other. So just kind of try it out and see sort of what feels better in your body. and we'll practice it in our flow this week too. But thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye.